It was Ohio University.
Ohio, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. You
yeah,
did say
Ohio.
that. You
Yeah,
said
no,
that.
yeah, no,
Yeah, because
Ohio.
right.
Yeah, Ohio
Yeah.
University in Athens, Ohio. So it's in kind of like the southern part of Ohio. It's about I want to say it's about 30. No, it's about yeah 45 minutes east of Ohio State University.
Oh, okay. And so, and
Yeah.
what did you study?
I studied at that time it was telecommunications, but what was interesting about that was that I didn't really know. I had taken that class in high school, that media class in high school, where I was putting together material for Black history and whatnot, but I
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
didn't. Yeah, but I didn't. That was the first time where I was like, well, I think that I want to go to school to do this, right? So that was when the bug really kind of got me. And but I had already applied to Ohio University, before then, and I had declared my major as business because my dad was a business major down there, and so I was just like, well, I guess I'll be a business major too, right? But not with any real purpose. So I ended up because of my grades. Like I said, I didn't graduate with a 3 point. I graduated with
Right.
like a 2.7 or something
Average.
like that.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so I didn't get into the business school. And
Mm.
so they put me in general college. They accepted me into the school.
Which is
My
good.
yeah,
It's good to start that way.
yeah, they accepted me into, it ended up kind of being a blessing. So then I had to so then I was just in general, I was just in
Hmm.
like, general education, with, just kind of like a major that was non-declared. And so I studied, and so I went and explored, trying to see, all right, can we get, how can I get into do what it is that I want to do? Well, they had a
What did
film
you want to
school.
do? What did you
Yeah,
want to do?
so I wanted to do film. I wanted to study film.
So at
And
that
so
time you
yeah,
so why okay so let okay pause
yeah,
right there because I want to know now we get into some meat and potatoes here but a little
yeah,
bit of gravy because I
yeah.
want to know like why I need the why to what made you decide that you wanted to do film at that time because I know you said being the only child you had an imagination so
Yeah.
so how did you really know that that's something you really wanted to do?
Well, I think that what it was that, you know, when I heard music, especially the type of music that my dad and I were listening to, and my mom, really. I mean, everybody that I named, my mom, liked too. Um, kind of, you know, I would always see images, and I always loved soundtracks, right? I always
Yes.
loved
Mm-hmm.
music with images, and I
Okay.
always felt that always told a complete story. And so when I got to when I took that class in high school, I was able to put images with music that I thought was very fitting to bring out that emotion in those
So you
images.
was doing music videos.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. And I,
Yeah.
I absolutely enjoyed that. And I was like, man, this is really kind of like what I want to do. And so I love being able to just craft, kind of, little stories like that. Now, this was back in a time though where there wasn't really any digital, right? So,
Right.
making stuff, was kind of hard. In high school you had the VHS tapes and things
Yes.
like that, you know what
Floppy
I'm
disk.
saying?
Hmm.
Yeah. And so, you couldn't really, it wasn't like today where you could, make a whole situation with your phone.
On your phone.
So,
Hmm.
right. So I wanted to go to film school. And so there were some great Black folks in the film school down there at that time. So what I ended up doing was I went and I explored that, and I found out that you had to be a graduate student in order to do the film program down there.
Really? Wow. Why
Yeah.
so far ahead?
Yeah. And it was considered one of the top schools in the nation because of access to equipment. They had a bunch of film cameras, CP16s and Bowflexes and stuff like that, little wind up, film cameras and stuff, and so you could get your hand and lights and everything. They had a lot of production equipment down there that you could get your hands on. And so, I wanted to get in there, and I couldn't. And so I had to do the next best thing, which was to do the video portion of that. And at that time, it was the School of Telecommunications, and that's what I did. And so, but I had to apply to get into the school. And so since I was already in college, I had to have letters of recommendations from professors that were working with me. So I didn't get in my freshman year. I couldn't. So I had to be down there for the first year and get letters of recommendations, take tests and all kind of stuff, present that to the school. And then the school would make a decision on whether or not they were going to allow me to get into the school. The college was going to allow me to get into the school, and they did. And so from there on, I started, that was the start of really, the career that I have today. So
okay, yes, and okay, and we love that too. So now with that experience of being able to own your craft, even though you had to go through some loopholes, you had to go through some loopholes, but you was able to own your craft. What was the pivotal moment you was about to talk about in college?
Yeah, so well that was, so then there was a professor down there. His name was Jeffrey Ray. We called him Jeff, and Black guy, very, very extremely smart. He was in the film program. He was a TA in the film program down there, and he had come to, so it was a graduate program, right? So he had been down there, he had kind of come back, and he had lived in Kenya with his family for a little while. Then his family, moved back to Athens. And so he, his wife Tama was a teacher there at the university as well. And so he was in the film program. And so my freshman year, he taught a class called Black Media.
Okay. Black Media.
And this was the first time that I saw the intentionality of how Black folks were portrayed within different mediums. And that was very, very alarming to me. It was very educational, and it completely changed how I saw it completely changed how I saw business, in the way that, they just in terms of how big business saw Black folks, for their entertainment, for, mocking, for, saw us as just being, uneducated and, a step up from pets. And we studied a lot of films, and we studied a lot of advertising in that class. And it was a fantastic class. It really was. And we learned a lot, and it's funny because years later we would still talk about that class, and I still have my college book from that class. Yeah, I know. It's just after all these years, it was just just, the other thing that I want to say about Ohio University at that time, and this was like the early 90s, they were really engaged in terms of bringing more minority students into the school. And they had a program called Links. And Links was a weekend in the summer where it was a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday where they brought in all of the minority students that were going to attend the fall, and they gave us an orientation. So we took all of our tests, we scheduled our classes, and we got to know each other within that context. And those are the folks that I met in that class are still some of my best friends today. And
Wonderful.
we carried that all through. And so a lot of us were taking Black media, together. And so we're all kind of gaining this, going through this experience at the same time. And it's really just it was really molding us to become really informed Black citizens, and
Yes.
Black and minority citizens. And it was I loved it. So years later, they don't have that links program anymore. In fact,
Mm,
the university has actually done some other things that have just kind
mm.
of been not in the interest of
No
minority
judgment.
students, sad to
Hmm.
say. But
Yeah.
at that
Yeah.
time, there was a real concerted effort to really get minority students down there. And I was just, it was a blessing that I was able to attend during that time. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm happy that you was able to, because I'm like I'm absorbing everything that you're saying, and I'm really enjoying the evolution from you getting the support, or getting the, how should I say, the support and the presence of these male figures in your life, from your
Yeah.
father, grandfather. Now you have this
Yeah.
brotherhood in college, and
Yeah.
it's so amazing to me. They don't
Yeah.
make them like you anymore. They'll make them like they used to. When
Yeah.
it comes to men, and a lot of women, they don't make them like this anymore. So this is
Yeah.
so refreshing to me. So I just really am glad that you're here in this space right now. You just don't
Yeah.
know.
Oh,
I
that's
mean,
awesome. Yeah.
yeah, it really is. It really is a blessing for me.
Yeah.
From and it's also a great transition from my interview with Isaiah David Paul, because like
Uh-huh.
he's one of my top interviews. Like I just really was enjoying every moment and
Yeah.
every
That's awesome.
bit of every bit of master class that he gave us. It's just,
Yeah.
I'm just really loving this. I'm
Yeah.
loving this. Yeah,
Yeah,
Black
it was.
excellence.
Yeah,
That's Black
yeah,
excellence.
it was. It,
Yeah.
it was. Because I always look at college as just really, probably some of the most important years, in my life. Without a doubt, because it's I have friends in high school, but it was my college friends that I really
That
kind
is
of
stuff. Hmm.
bonded with, and that
Yes.
we stuck it out, throughout these years. And I remember just even in my wedding, every I had 6 groomsmen. There was only one groomsman was my, or maybe I had 7. One groomsman was my brother-in-law, and then um I had my buddy from my old neighborhood in Akron, on Peerless, my buddy Vince. But then everybody else was from college. All my ushers were from
Nice.
college. My best man was from
Still
college.
that
So
brotherhood. Yeah,
yeah, so it was just,
and that's like the main one of the main rites of passage, where you need your brothers, your pillars,
yeah,
is that
yeah.
sacred union. So for
Yeah.
them to
So
be,
yeah, it was
yeah,
I
mhm.
mean, that experience, and just kind of experiencing that journey with those fellas was really, um you just we're so blessed. There's about 11 of us that take a guys trip from college every year. And most of us are alphas, but some aren't, and so we go to we go to different cities to watch the Browns games and stuff like that. But we always reflect on those college days, and what it meant to us, and how much
Yes.
of a family we are because of them.
Yeah, and I love that for you guys. And I also want, and I'm glad that you I want to segue into that, the fraternity Alpha Phi Alpha.
Yeah.
And there's been such a divide these last few years when it comes to the Greek organizations, and they see it as demonic, or they see it as, because my pastor talked about this a couple of months ago, and he explained each of the Greek organizations, and the how, and this is just not his words, not mine.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what you idolize, the idols that you look up to, when it
Sure.
comes to the big organizations. And so I want to get your take on that, and people denouncing, from that. And so I want to get your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think with the fraternities and sorority, it's one of the things that in terms of in terms of Black folks within America, one of the things is, and this is probably true in other places, where there was the slave trade that kind of took us to different areas, is that you know by not having our own language, it really puts us at a disadvantage from a community standpoint, because with language comes history, comes different stories handed down, comes religion. And so with us not having that, I think that puts us at a very at a disadvantage from a community standpoint, right?
Right,
So
right.
with that, you have, particularly the fraternities and sororities, to where it is that you can you can find community with,
Hmm.
like-minded individuals. And
Yes.
I think that is a great thing. People get hung up on, the Greek letters, and, why would you want to, call yourself Greek, and all of that stuff. And I feel like that's just missing the entire point of, the organizations as a whole. Those are all of those are great organizations that have stood the test of time. I mean, when you're talking about, 1906, I mean,
Hmm.
that is, that was you're talking about brothers in Ithaca, New York in 1906. So that's a very, and to have an organization that is worldwide, you know, at this point, with brothers that really do great community work. I'm not seeing, because to me that's the bigger picture. Whether I'm calling myself Greek or not is, I don't know. I don't even know where that conversation goes. So I don't, and I've seen some of the same reels that you've seen of, people saying, well, the only one that I idolize is my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And so I'm denouncing, the my sorority or fraternity and
Hmm.
whatnot. And I think, like, okay, well, I certainly, wouldn't get in the way of you and your Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. But what I would say is that, at what point did any of these fraternities or sororities say that you had to idolize them? I was never,
Hmm.
I was never the alpha Devon. I was always Devon the alpha.
The alpha.
Like,
Hmm.
I had an identity outside of the fraternity. And
Yes.
so it's like, I just, the fraternity was a great way for me to meet, like-minded individuals, to share resources, and to just have just a true brotherhood and conversations with, folks that are going through a lot of the same things that you're going through, you know?
Right.
And so I just, you know, I, I was always big picture. I was always big picture with that. And so, my dad was an alpha. I'm a legacy down at Ohio University. So we're both from the same chapter. And I've never, even when I'm older now, I just don't, I don't see that.
Right.
Yeah,
You don't identify with those perspectives when
yeah,
it comes
I
to.
just, yeah, exactly. I don't
Mhm.
identify with those perspectives, and I'm not, knocking anyone's experience, or just kind of what's right for them, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, that kind of thing. It's just not a perspective that I share.
All right, but well said, Devin. Thank you so much for sharing that
Mhm.
perspective, because I always like to get, because I you kind of similar sentiments from the other guests that I had that were part of Greek organizations, and they kind of
Yeah.
said the same thing. And it's more of a like a spiritual bond as well. So they did mention that, and they just you represent more of the brotherhood and sisterhood, in that aspect. So
Yeah, I mean,
they
because
didn't take away. Yeah, they'll take away from that.
yeah, because I mean, who's praying to I just who's praying to these Greek organizations? I've never seen anybody get down on some knees and folded hands and pray to Alpha, you know, to help them get through life.
Mm-hmm.
I just I, I don't know, man. It
Yeah,
just,
no,
to me, it's just
yeah.
not a, it's just, again, yeah, I just don't share in the perspective.
Duly noted. And so I want to transition into your phase out of college. What did you do straight out of college? Did you started to work like what kind of jobs did you have?
Yeah.
To pay the bills, and before you got into your craft.
Well, I honestly, I had some jobs in high school and college in terms of, in terms of, just kind of working, at, kind of the mall and stuff like that, but, it was interesting because when I got into, one of the, uh, my first, in college, my first film shoot was actually on the winter break that we had. So we were on quarters at that time. So we had long winter breaks. And my buddy, his sister was in the film school. And so she was really pivotal for getting me going within, just within that art. And so she was shooting a film up in Cleveland, in East Cleveland. And she was like, why don't you come up and you can stay with me and that was my buddy. And, you can work this film, I'll have you kind of do sound or, kind of be a sound assistant, on this film project that I'm doing. And I was like, okay, great. And that was like the second time the bug hit me because it was just fantastic in terms of just being able to shoot scenes and work with equipment and stuff like that. I really enjoyed that. And so, when I got out of college, because even in college, I really, I was really into what I wanted to do. Like there was never kind of like, a waiver to like, do something else or hey, like I knew that this is exactly what I wanted to do. So because I wasn't in the film school though, I couldn't take a lot of those classes, but I was able to kind of sneak into a couple classes just to get the knowledge. And then I was able to work on a lot of the film students capstone projects and thesis projects and stuff like that in terms of doing sound. I was a big sound guy down there. And so, and then, so that was kind of what I was doing with them. And then also too, I was also editing on Avid systems down there. So I did 2 years real heavy on Avid systems. So then when I got out of school, I had all of that knowledge. And so I, there was two things that I knew there was one thing that I knew I didn't really want to do, and that was news. So I never applied to any news stations. I felt like I felt like it wasn't creative. I didn't want to talk about shootings, every day or be involved in creating that content. I really wanted to just, I wanted to kind of go a different direction. So, I applied to a couple production companies. One production company was a small production company that really did a lot of Amish furniture commercials and videos and stuff like that, which was,
Amish furniture.
about 45 minutes south of Akron in this, really small town called Dover, Ohio, and Torelli's Video. And so that was like my first job, coming out of college. But I didn't get that job till I graduated in like June or early June. I didn't get that job until like October, November. And And then I had applied for an editing job up in Cleveland at this company called Cinecraft Productions. I didn't get that editing job, but they brought me up and they said, "Hey, do you want to be an intern here? We can try you out for 90 days." And I
Okay.
said, "Okay, cool." So I was either going 45 minutes with traffic up to Cleveland or a strong 45 minutes down to Dover, every day with those two positions. The Torelli video thing, there was a bigger production company up in Cleveland. So I was seeing just kind of like where the gaps were with the one company that I was working for down in Dover. So I ended up leaving there and ended up getting a full-time position in Cleveland. They tried me out on some editing and stuff like that. They saw that I had a pretty strong background in that, but really they put me on in the back room, making labels and VHS duplications at that time, and getting those ready to ship out for a lot of the projects that they were producing. So I did that for a few months, but
Okay.
then, but then I ended up, really becoming a powerhouse there and producing and directing, a lot of their jobs. It got to the point to where at one point, their demo reel was about 80% of my work. So it was 80% of that demo reel was my work. So yeah, anytime a big project came, with that company, it was, they were putting me on.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
you was put on. Okay.
Yeah, and I was the only black person, at the time, and
Right.
I want to say that I was the first black hire there. They were,
Mm.
that company had been in existence for, a number of years. I'm talking about like 1940s, 30s type of thing, and so I ended up, like I said, there weren't, if there were a couple before me, it was very, very few, if any.
Right,
So
far between.
yeah. So it was a family owned company, Neil and Maria McCormick, and they were kind of like a real conservative couple too. Like real conservative. It was a conservative company. It was a real, they were a real conservative couple too. But they ended up taking a liking to me, and I considered them, kind of, my parents outside of my parents.
Right.
They really had a strong hand of raising me within the
Right. Within the industry, yes.
within the industry. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I mean, without a doubt, and I call them on all the major holidays, even to this day.
No,
And
yeah.
I call them I call them both on Mother and Father's Day.
That's wonderful, and I'm glad that you still have that connection with them.
Oh,
So let me
absolutely. Yeah.